Velikovsky was a brilliant Russian psychoanalyst, a friend of Albert Einstein, and a co-founder of the Hebrew University. Velikovsky was not an Egyptologist and so only had access to Egyptian sources through secondary materials and translations. His method was highly inductive. From his psychoanalytic background, he understood that behind the biblical witness of the Exodus, and behind many other traditions in the biblical narratives, there lay a core of historical reality. From reading the text, he understood that behind the many and varied testimonies, there was consistency. He was also convinced that if this were the case, there would be witnesses in Egyptian records to the same events. At the same time, he reasoned that if some of the events described in the biblical texts were true, there would also be testimony in other world literature of the past. Thus, his method was to set aside, at least initially, how Egyptology had arranged the written materials chronologically, and instead to look for testimonies similar to those of the Bible in Egyptian literature. His approach resembled a criminal investigation, sifting through all the evidence to identify the missing criminal and, through him, locate the stolen goods. In his mind, this search was abundantly rewarded. For example, in the Ipuwer papyrus, the admonitions of an Egyptian sage from a hieratic papyrus in Leiden, Gardner 1909, he understood it not as a collection of proverbs or riddles, but as a historical testimony. In this he agreed with Gardner. Hence, Ipuwer became for him the second witness to the Exodus, the first being the Bible. My endeavor has been to find in Egyptian sources some mention of a natural catastrophe. The description of disturbances in the papyrus Ipuwer, when compared with the scriptural narrative, gives a strong impression that both sources relate the very same events. From there, his method was to compare the evidence from biblical traditions point by point with traditions preserved in Egyptian sources. For him, it was the synchronism among the details which testified to historical reality. For example, in the case of Joshua and the sun standing still in the valley of Ajalon, he did not dismiss it as mythology. Rather, he reasoned that if the sun really stood still, it indicated a problem with the Earth's rotation on its axis. If this were the case, witnesses in other ancient cultures would also have recorded it in their literary or oral traditions. Thus, he went to as many world literatures as possible to see if they contained parallel testimonies. For example, he looked for synchronisms between the details recorded in 1 Kings 1:15 and 2 Chronicles 1:14, both in the Masoretic text and the Septuagint, as well as traditions preserved by Josephus, Antiquities, Manetho, Julius Africanus, Chronography, Syncellus and Augustine, City of God. Hyksos and Amalek. A cardinal point in his scheme was the identification of the Hyksos. He disagreed with the theory of Josephus that the Israelites were the Hyksos, and with others who saw them as Mitanni, Aryans or Scythians. Instead, he argued that Amalek and his people in Exodus chapter 17 verses 13 to 16 were the Hyksos. Exodus 17 verse 13 states, in Hebrew, Vayahalosh, Yehoshua et Amalek ve'et Amo lefi Harev, and Joshua weakened Amalek and his people with the edge of the sword. For Velikovsky's reading, Amalek ve'et Amo refers to the Hyksos. Manetho explained the etymology of Hyksos as Hyk equals king, Sos equals shepherds. Velikovsky suggested that modern etymology understood the Egyptian meaning as Hyke, that is ruler, and Sos equals foreigners. The Egyptian name for the Hyksos, he argued, was often Amu. Manetho noticed that some identified the Amu as Arabians, against Appian. Velikovsky reasoned that if that were the case, there would also be evidence in Arabic sources. Thus Velikovsky built his identification on Arabic, Hebrew, and Egyptian sources. Hebrew examples: Psalm 78, 49 Mishlahat Malachi Raim, a band of evil angels. Velikovsky suggested amending this to Mishlahat Malkei Roim, an invasion of evil kings/shepherd kings. He pointed out that the first reading is unusual Hebrew and grammatically problematic since Roim would not agree properly in form. He argued that the correct plural of evil is Ra'at, not Roim. Hence he concluded that the phrase refers to the invasion of the king shepherds, that is the Hyksos. Numbers 24 verse 7 states, Yi Izal Mayim Middalyo, Vezaro Be Mayim Rabim, Veyarom Me, Agag Malko, Vetinase Malkuto. Here Balaam prophesies that Israel's king will be exalted higher than Agag, the Amalekite ruler. Velikovsky reasoned that this Agag I, was the same as Apophon among the Amu Hyksos. Num 24 verse 20 states, Vayar et Amalek Vayisa Meshalo Vayomar, Rishit Goyim Amalek, Veaharito Ad Ovid, and he saw Amalek, and took up his parable and said, Amalek was the first of the nations, but his latter end shall be utter destruction. Velikovsky emphasized that this made sense only if Amalek Hyksos were truly dominant in Egypt. Agag, Apop identification. Velikovsky raised 2 points. The Amalekites are supposed to have been an unimportant band of robbers. Why were they called first among the nations? And what could the blessing higher than Agag mean? He pointed out that the name Agag also appears in the story of Saul, 1 Samuel 15, and drew attention to the AMU royal name, Apop. Noting that in the orthography of the Mesha stele the letters Gimel and Pei are very similar, he proposed that confusion between the two could occur. He concluded that Agag-wi, Balaam's Agag, and Agag-2, Saul's Agag, corresponded to Apop-wi and Apop-2 among the AMU. One reigned near the beginning of the Hyksos Amalekite period, and the other near its end. Another important piece of evidence was Papyrus 1116b, which describes how the AMU oppressed farmers. The AMU approach in their might, and their hearts rage against those who are gathering in the harvest. They take away their cattle from the plowing. The land is utterly perished, and nothing remains. Velikovsky compared this to the experience of Israel during the Judges period. Judges 6 verses 3-5 state Vehaya imzara Yisrael, Ve'ala Midyan, Va'amalek, Ubene Kedem, Ve'alu ala Venaiha Avka Aza Venaiha la Yasha Arva Mahai Beishara Iva Vashi Vashivor Vahimver. For Velikovsky, the synchronism between the papyrus and the biblical description confirmed the Hyksos-Amalek identification. He proposed that their rule lasted 440 years. Saul, Samuel, and Agag II. Velikovsky argued that they were first defeated by Saul in his attack on the city of Amalek. 1 Sam 15, 3:10 records Saul's command to destroy Amalek from Havilah, near the Euphrates, to Shur, near the border of Egypt. Velikovsky identified Shur with Avaris, Hawar, the Hyksos capital in the delta. 1 Sam 15, 9 Vayamol, Shavel, Va'am, Al-Agag Va'al-Metab Hatzoan Vabakar. Vayamol Shaul Ve'ha'am, Al-Agag, Ve'al-Metab Hatzon Ve'habakar. And Saul and the people spared Agag and the best of the sheep and cattle. He understood that Agag II was identical with Apop II, the last Hyksos Amalekite king. Velikovsky also identified the one, or foreigner, in the report of Pharaoh Amozi as King Saul himself, arguing that Saul's victories shook the Hyksos Empire. After Avaris fell, the Amu Amalekites poured into southern Palestine. They attacked Ziklag, 1 Sam 30, 1 Josh 19:5, and held a stronghold in Sharuhen, Josh 19:6. Synchronisms with Amose and Davidic monarchy. Velikovsky's method was to read Egyptian testimonies, such as those of General Amose, alongside 1 Samuel 1 Kings. From the expulsion of the Amu Hyksos Amalekites, he traced synchronisms through the reigns of Saul, David, Solomon, Rehoboam, Jeroboam, and onward. For him, the fall of Agag Apop at the hand of Saul or Samuel marked the rise of 2 new empires, in Egypt and southward, the 18th dynasty, in Canaan and northward, the kingdom of Judah. Key names in Hebrew: Ag, Agag, Amalekite king, Num 24:7, 1 Sam 15:8, Emelk, Amalek. Amalek identified with the Hyksos, Amu, Egyptian term for foreigners, identified with Hyksos Rashit Jevaim, Reshit Goyim, first of the nations, Num 24:20. Velikovsky emphasized that these terms point to Amalek Hyksos as a great power, not mere raiders. Velikovsky's chronological revision. Velikovsky emphasized that the identification of the AMU with Amalek was the foundation of his revised chronology. On the basis of the foregoing, the conclusion is inescapable that the AMU of the Egyptian sources and the Amalekites of the Hebrew and Arab sources were not two different peoples, but one and the same nation. Even the name is the same, AMU. Also Omaya, a frequent name among the Amalekites, was a synonym for Amalekite. Jauhari, an Arabian lexicographer of the 10th century, wrote, "It is handed down that this name, AMU or Omaya, was a designation for an Amalekite man." But this identification created chronological tension, whose history must be shifted by centuries. Velikovsky recognized that biblical chronology was tightly bound to Assyrian history. For example, one could debate whether Sennacherib invaded Judah in 702 or 700 BCE, but not whether he invaded in 1280 BCE. Similarly, Egyptian chronology was treated as the yardstick of all world history. Minoan and Mycenaean datings were tied to it. His boldest move was in Ages in Chaos, 1952, where he argued, Israel entered Canaan at the same time the Hyksos entered Egypt. Pharaoh Ahmose was the same pharaoh who gave refuge to Hadad the Edomite, 1 kgs 1119. Ahmose and Hadad 1 kgs 1119-20 Vayimtsa hen baini paro maod vayitin lvo aisha avot aishtvo avot tapnis hagbira. Vayimsa henbi aina pharaoh meod, vayitin lo isha ahat ishto ahat tapinis hagavira. And Hadad found great favor in the eyes of Pharaoh, and he gave him a wife, the sister of his own wife, the sister of Tapenes the queen. Vataled lovo avot tapnes et nubat binvo vadigmlev tapnes beit paro vahig nubat beit paro bidvok ne paro. Vataled lo ahot tapenis et genubat beno, vatigmelehu tapenis beit paro, vayihi genubat beit paro betokne paro. And the sister of Tapenes bore him Genubat his son, and Tapenes weaned him in Pharaoh's house, and Genubat was in Pharaoh's household among the sons of Pharaoh. Velikovsky noted that the Egyptian tribute lists of Thutmose III included a people called the Geneptu, Janbatu, whom he associated with Hadad's son Genubat. Thus he placed Thutmose on as contemporary with Solomon, the pharaoh who burned Gezer. Thutmose III as Shishak, who harbored Jeroboam, 1 kgs 1240, and raided Solomon's temple in the 5th year of Rehoboam. Shishak and the raid on Jerusalem 1 kgs 1425-26 Vehi Bishnat Hamesh Lamelech Rabam ala Shishak Melech Mitzrayim al Irv Shalem, Vayehi Bishnat Hamesh Lamelech Rehavam, Allah Shishak Melech Mitzrayim al Yerushalayim. And it came to pass in the 5th year of King Rehoboam, that Shishak king of Egypt came up against Jerusalem. Vayika et Avot Servat Beit Eva Veit Avot Servat Beit Hamelech Veit Hakol Laka Vayika et Kalmagene Hazahab Asher Asha Shlomo Vayika et Otzrat Beit Yahuwah Veit Otzrat Beit Hamelech Veit Hakol Laka Vayika et Kolmagene Hazahav Asher Asa Shelomo. And he took away the treasures of the house of Yahuwah and the treasures of the king's house. He took all, and he took away all the shields of gold that Solomon had made. 1 kgs 1017 Vaya Ash Shlomo Magane Zahab Shlosh Meavat Magan Shibka Zahab Ya'ale Al Hamagan Ha'ihad Vayitnem Hamalek H Beit Ya'ar Halban Von Vaya As Shelomo Magane Zahab Shalosh Mayat Megan Shivka Zahab Ya'ale Al Hamagan Ha'ihad Vayitnem Hamelek Beit Ya'ar Halavanan. And Solomon made 300 shields of beaten gold. 3 minas of gold went into one shield, and the king put them in the house of the forest of Lebanon. Velikovsky argued that the reliefs of Thutmose III, showing treasure taken in his campaigns, actually depict these temple treasures of Solomon, the gold and silver and bronze shields. He further claimed that Kadesh, usually identified with Kadesh on the Orontes, was actually Jerusalem, called Har Kodesh, Holy Mountain. Thus for him, Rehoboam was the opponent of Thutmose III. Assessment of Velikovsky's method. While Velikovsky's identifications were imaginative, critics note, his removal of 6-8 centuries from Egyptian chronology was drastic and disruptive. The identification of Kadesh with Jerusalem is problematic. If Thutmose III campaigned 17+ times in Canaan, why is there no biblical record of such overwhelming presence? His approach could destabilize not only Egyptian but also Assyrian chronology, which is comparatively well established. Still, his method of seeking synchronisms and cross-cultural witnesses remains intriguing, especially his parallels between the biblical record and papyrological inscriptional evidence.